So now I just move this up against the stuff.
Okay, great, thanks.
All right. Again, anything I have to do is, point, I can point something.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Lisa Lassiter-Welu, one of the pastors here, and Reverend Noé Lopez is in the back, my partner in crime working on the technology. Thank you for your patience. Each time that Justin from Uncle Bobby's gives Gabriel a call, we're always glad to hear from him, and it's usually called about sharing space. And when we do that for the community, and when we do that, and I'm up here to welcome folks in, I usually use the words that we often use when gathered in this space, which is that no matter where you've come from and no matter where you're going, no matter what you believe or doubt, no matter what you're feeling or just not feeling, no matter what you have or don't have, and no matter who you love, all of who you are is invited into this space. By God, we love you. And I believe that with my whole being, and I have to tell you, I'm not from Philadelphia. I've only been at this church 9 months. And the words, whatever you believe or doubt, has had new meaning in this welcome today, because in the last week I have heard just how personal the conversation we're about to have is. And I have had calls from people across the spectrum of what people believe and doubt, as I'm sure you can imagine. And I say that simply to say that I'm a pastor, and I promised I'd be brief, but I am a pastor, and so I'm always listening for the word, right? And it so happens that tomorrow I'm preaching on the woman and the well. And that is where Jesus, who's isolated in his own ways, chooses to go into another territory, goes into Samaria, and goes to meet with one of the most isolated individuals, both because of her own choices, but also all the systems around her. And I mention that today because he asked her for water. He needs mercy. He needs something basic, right? And then what he says is, I can give you living water. And I promise I'm not preaching. This is the deepest I've gone religiously, but we are talking matters of life and death, so I'll be real quick. He says, I'll give you living water. And the way living water comes is through spirit and truth. Through spirit and truth. And for us, we understand the spirit as including mercy and justice, as liberation for our personal stuff, as well as systemic stuff. And so it is my hope today that that spirit and truth can move us and our world in meaningful ways. As we listen to each other and all, Samaritans, Jews, as I go back to Scripture and beyond. Now, that's the deep stuff I want to say of creating space today. The basic stuff is this: there's bathrooms, don't you worry. But this church is a little confusing. So if you head out that way, we've got friends, Amanda's there, and others who can show you, wind around to the bathrooms. If you've got young ones, I don't see many, but there are coloring bags in the back. If you have other questions about things that happen in this space, service, or what have you, ways to serve, ways to worship, what have you, grab me or Pastor Dave or any of our volunteers. And the last thing I'll say is right out here is the community fridge. Next time you come by and you think about it, drop some food or take some food. It is good to be here listening with you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your continuing commitment to justice and right. Unfortunately, in America, so many of us have found that justice is the exception and not the rule, irrespective of what is said ad nauseum about this place. I heard a radio announcer last week say something very interesting. He said, yes, America is an exceptional place. It's exceptionally racist. And that's what brings us here today. This event is organized by the Mumia United Nations Liaison Group, and that's a collaboration of Joanna Fernandez, who will be one of our panelists today, Judge Wendell Griffen, who will be one of our panelists today, and Anna Schiffman and Michael Schiffman of Germany, Mark Taylor, and also Julia Wright, who is the daughter of Richard Wright. Fortunately, she can't be with us in present today, but she's with us online. Would like to also note that this event is in collaboration with the Love Not Fear, Mobilization for Mumia, and Campaign to Bring Mumia Home. Now, before I put my foot in my mouth, I can't recognize everybody who's here, who's done so much for not only this movement, but for so many other social justice movements over many decades. But I would be remiss if I didn't recognize that Mumia's grandson is here, Jamal Jr. And the reality is that none of us would be here but for Pam Africa. Justice for Abu Jamal since December of 1981. And I think you were working on it about 5 minutes before I started reporting on it, on December 9, 1981. We're here to examine, and you're going to hear some incredible aspects of this injustice involving Mumia Abu-Jamal. In many ways, Mumia's case is iconic injustice. Yes, Mumia is an icon, but let us not forget that Mumia is a real person. There's a face behind the facts. Mumia is a father. Mumia is a grandfather. Mumia is a widower. His beloved wife passed recently. Mumia is a brother, a relative, and a friend. Mumia is a journalist who has written over 3,000 commentaries and articles, many of which were written on death row with a pen, not with a typewriter, not with a laptop. And I can tell you that 3,000 commentaries exceeds the majority of the journalists who are working outside of the prison walls. Mumia is a scholar. He's authored and co-authored over 12 books. One of the books that he's co-authored with is with one of our other panelists here, Dr. Mark Lamont Hill. Truly, all the accomplishments that Mumia has made since his unjust arrest and subsequent wrongful conviction makes him a Renaissance man. Here's a person who's learned 2 languages, one of which is German, which is one of the most difficult languages in the world to learn. He maintains contact with people all around the world. As you'll hear, solidarity messages that we'll be giving later on today. And we shouldn't forget that Mumia is one of the 1,400 plus inmates in Pennsylvania serving this sentence called life in prison without parole. That means you stay in prison until you die. And let us not forget that 1,400 plus, these are people who are just 60 years and older. Pennsylvania has about 5,000 people who are serving life without parole. And almost 1,000 of that 1,400 are people over 65 years old. So much for progressive Pennsylvania. So what brings us here today? Well, we're here to talk about the Mumia injustice, but without getting too deep. And many of our speakers will give you some detail that you probably never heard before. But we're here about something that came up a few years ago when boxes of evidence that had been hidden for 36 years came to light. So we're hearing about withheld evidence. In Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, over 33 people have been exonerated from wrongful convictions since 2018. And this is according to the National Registry of Exonerations. And of those 33 people who have been exonerated, 30 of them had withheld evidence in their case. That's 90.9%. Now, the District Attorney's Office in Philadelphia has proclaimed that withholding evidence is one of the most common forms of misconduct by prosecutors and police. They talk about the Brady matter, and Judge Griffen will explain in detail that we can all understand without going to law school what Brady's about. But Brady is a U.S. Supreme Court ruling that essentially says that the DA has information that is for innocence or guilt, exculpatory or inculpatory, then they have to give it to the defense. That didn't happen in the Mumia case. It didn't happen in 1981. It didn't happen in 1982 during the trial. It didn't happen in 1995 during the big appeal hearing. But this matter of the district attorneys and prosecutors having to turn over information is not just Supreme Court of the United States or Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. It is also listed in the rules of professional conduct. Yeah, lawyers have rules of professional conduct. Surprising. Don't hate me. But if you look under the rules of professional conduct, section 3.8, which is special duties of prosecutors, it says that they have to turn over information, making timely disclosures. I would argue that 36 years is not a timely disclosure. And I think I would say that without contradiction. But this notion of needing to turn over information to make the system fair, allegedly. This is also codified in the court rules. In Pennsylvania Code, Title 235, Rule 573 also calls for timely disclosures. And I don't mean to bore you with all of these letters of the law, but by citing these letters of the law, we clearly see how Mumia has been jerked for over 40 years. Now, I could dress it up and put another type of word on it, and if we're in the church, we could put some other kind of words on it. But this is just fundamentally wrong. And then here we have in Philadelphia a district attorney who has made his whole persona releasing people for wrongful convictions and pointing out what prosecutors have done, what they've done wrong. And he's going on to say that even regardless of how much time has elapsed, these things need to be corrected. But we have a judge who's now sitting on Mumia's appeal saying that some of this evidence is time barred. You didn't bring it out in time. Wrong is wrong. And if it takes 100 years to make that wrong right, then it must be done. And that's why we're here. One of the things that was so shocking in 1981, Pam, and you know because you were there, when Mumia was arrested, the first thing people said, like, what? Mumia? No, this couldn't happen. This was a man who was known in the community as someone who worked for the people. He was called the voice of the voiceless. In journalists, the Society of American Journalists, the Society of Journalists has an ethics code. And in its ethics code, it says that journalists should give voice to the voiceless. But they didn't put that provision into their ethics code until the mid-1990s. So here we had a man who was performing as a journalist in the 70s, being known as the voice of the voiceless because he was taking care of the people. So this is the type of man who we are talking about here. And I'm going to stop talking. I'll let you hear some of the things that this man has done. We have a solidarity message from people in France who've been working diligently on this case. There's a group of people in France who have been picketing outside of the U.S. Embassy since around 1995. They were there weekly, and then it became monthly. And I know I've seen them in there, standing out in the cold with them, taking pictures with my fingers falling off. People all around the world see this injustice and they're moved by it. Julia Wright got a message from the International Federation of Journalists. This is an organization that has 600,000 members. And Dr. Fernandez has told me that it's now 600,001 because they have now had Mumia as a member of this organization. The President's message from the International Federation of Journalists is, we would like to express our solidarity and support for you, Mumia. Throughout the world, men and women are fighting against the inequities and arbitrariness that have been subjected to view for so many years. Your courage and tenacity are a source of admiration and set a great example. With the ever-present hope of obtaining your release as soon as possible in solidarity and brotherhood. So we're going to move to some video messages, one from the French Collective, and then we'll also hear from another icon, the late Bishop Desmond Tutu, the anti-apartheid activist from South Africa.
Que la justice de Pennsylvanie n'a jamais pris en compte. that the principality justice never took into account.
Donc il s'agit pour nous de rappeler notre soutien à cet homme.
We came here to show support to this man.
Pour qu'enfin justice lui soit rendue.
At the end, justice will win.
L'arbitraire judiciaire,
The judiciary arbitrary
doit laisser enfin place, selon
must
nous,
leave place
à la vraie justice.
to a true justice.
À la vraie justice, pour nous, c'est celle qui respecte d'abord le droit à la présomption d'innocence.
The true justice is the justice who take into account the presumption of innocence.
C'est celle qui exclut le racisme dans ses décisions.
And the justice is exclude all racism.
La justice, c'est encore celle qui doit refuser de prendre en considération les témoignages estorqués.
And the justice will take into account the real testimony.
La justice, c'est celle qui doit prendre en compte un comportement des magistrats,
The justice should take into account the judges,
des magistrats qui doivent être libres dans leurs décisions et ne pas fonctionner comme c'est le cas de Mumia,
into account the judge decision and take the real evidence
sous la pression de la police.
and not under pressure of police.
Notre délégation qui a rendu ce jour visite à Mumia
Our delegation will visit today Mumia.
n'est pas ici présente pour donner des leçons de justice à
Is
Pennsylvanie,
not going to give lesson to Pennsylvania justice,
mais pour sortir cet homme, pour soutenir cet
to
homme
support him, to support Mumia,
dans ses droits à une justice
to have his right defended, to have the access to real justice,
qui lui permette de défendre son innocence.
justice who can help him to defend his rights.
La justice de Pennsylvanie s'honorerait d'en finir avec ces démons
I mean, justice, Pennsylvania justice should end playing with the demons,
qu'elle reconnaisse ses erreurs et ses fautes.
and she should recognize fully its faults.
La justice doit faire place à l'injustice.
The injustice should take back to justice
Et rendre la liberté à l'Union.
and finally give freedom to move.
Merci.
Thank you.
We visited Mumia today as a delegation from the International Federation of Journalists. My name is Larry Goldbetter. I'm the president of the National Writers Union in the U.S. and on the executive committee of the IFJ. And we offer Mumia the support of the 600,000 journalists around the world who are members of our international federation. And I'm glad to report that Mumia is not defeated, far from it. He told us he's exercising regularly, he's writing another book, and he's working on his PhD. So he's far from defeated. Mindset that he's at war under these conditions, and he knows how to fight. After 40 years, he knows how to deal with this. And some people, they get arrested for nonsense, and as soon as they get locked up, they know they're defeated. But that's not his mindset. That's not the mindset of other political prisoners in the U.S. And so I think he encouraged us maybe more than we encouraged him. But we're here to say that we're going to up the fight to free Mumia.
And Mumia is an honorary member of our Union for many to free Mumia with the Jackie, and we came here to visit Mumia. This is the first time I was honored to visit our colleagues and covering Mumia, and we will do our utmost as unionists, as a French delegation, French collective member, to fight to see Mumia free and have him maybe visiting some days Paris and having him meeting with our union, maybe with the IMG, as Gary said. We need him to be free. Thank you.
Very good.
Any regime where an inmate is held in isolation from others for anything beyond 15 days must be defined as having engaged in torture. In addition, Amnesty International in a 2001 report noted that Mumia's original trial did not meet the minimal standards of international law. Mumia's guilty verdict must be considered more than fraud. It is unacceptable because we deny the right to a new trial based on racial bias in jury selection, has faced years of prosecutorial and police misconduct and judicial bias. Now that it is clear that Mumia should never have been on death row, justice will not be served by relegating him to prison for the rest of his life. Yet another form of death sentence, based on even a minimal following of international human rights standards. Mumia should be released. I therefore join the call and ask others to follow, asking District Attorney Seth Williams to rise to the challenge of reconciliation, human rights, and justice. Drop this case now and allow Mumia Abu-Jamal to be released immediately with full time served. With thoughts of the biblical call of Isaiah to set free those who are bound, I wish you all peace. God bless you.
I think we all know that Bishop Tutu knows a thing or two about judicial biases and police misconduct. His church the church that he used to pastor at in Cape Town is literally right next door to what they call Slave House. And it's an entity in Cape Town where they literally used to sell slaves. And not too far from Tutu's church is a church where when they would hold their Sunday services, they would come out after the services and buy and sell slaves in the marketplace area right across, literally right across the street from the church. Our next speaker is Mr. Gabriel Bryan. Gabriel Bryan is a Philadelphia-based organizer whose work centers on incarceration and building community-based leadership. In addition to projects that foster mental health and wellness, he is a creative and former radio host. Gabriel is a longtime activist in the ongoing struggle to free all political prisoners. He hosts the internet radio show Stepping Into Tomorrow. And Gabe will talk to us about what Mumia means to Philadelphia, because we always hear so much that people out of town care more about Mumia than people in Philadelphia. And that's just one of the many big lies that have been told about this case. Okay?
Thank you, man. Peace, family. In the movement, the appropriate call and response after we say, what's the call, is free them all. What's the call? Free them all. What's the call? Free them all. What's the call? Free them all. You know, Philadelphia is a city of neighborhoods, and the beautiful thing about Philadelphia being a city of neighborhoods is it becomes a city of questions. And if you're from Philly, you understand, those questions become, what hundred you from? What school you went to? What block you from? And during those sets of questions, you begin to find yourself making connections. All of a sudden you might hear names like the Moon Gang come out, or the Moroccos, or the Tenderloin. Come on. I know the names. Some folk in here still know them names. I'm not going to go there. But after a while of you sharing that information and making that authentic and sincere connection, you begin to rap. And in a very sincere and soul-filling way, they say, okay, well, Brother Gabriel, what you on? Yeah, we're trying to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. Oh, Mumia? I know him. I used to listen to him back on WRTI. You know what? I used to hear him back on WHAT. Matter of fact, he used to be on WDAS. Matter of fact, my old head used to write for the Tribune. He knew when he was the president of the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists. What am I saying? What I'm saying is that there's a sincere thread of Mumia in our communities. There's a genuine connection of Mumia Abu-Jamal, who he has been to this city as a source of hope, as a source of healing, but ultimately as a source of revolution. In 95, when thousands of folks gathered to make sure that we could halt his execution, we would hear from the words of Mumia Abu-Jamal. In 2000, when the RNC was having their conventions, we heard Mumia's name. In 2011, right where City Hall sits when Occupy Philly took over. And in the camps, you saw signs that said free Mumia Abu-Jamal. In fact, in 2014, Darren Wilson all of a sudden is pronounced not guilty in the killing of Mike Brown. And I remember being at the foot of City Hall, and a young person says, what are we going to do? Hit the streets. And in 2014, as we talked about Ferguson, through those same Ferguson conversations, through it all, we heard the freeing of Mumia Abu-Jamal as part of the demands. In 2015, when we held the Philly is Baltimore rallies, and we were talking about Freddie Gray and the connections of Philadelphia and Baltimore. People in Philadelphia were saying, free Mumia. In 2020, when hundreds of thousands of folks found their way down the Parkway, all in the name of trying to free and understand the injustices of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and don't forget Tony McDade, Ahmaud Arbery, so many others. You would look out into the crowd and you see Latinos for George Floyd. You see LGBTQIA for George Floyd. You might see the Moon Gang. You might see South Philly. But more importantly, if you look closely, what I saw was free Mumia amidst the masses. I saw free Kamal Siddiqui amidst the masses. I saw free Leonard Peltier amidst the masses. I saw free Imam Jamil El-Amin amidst the masses. And what we're saying is that what Mumia has always said, not only is Philadelphia his home, and Philadelphia he is our native son, but he doesn't want you on Philadelphia to remember just him. He wants you to remember all the folks, all the prisoners who are elders, locked up and trumped up charges, who should be home with us right now with their families and loved ones. And we will continue to have these conversations, and we will be in neighborhoods as I close. And I'd be in this old neighborhood, meet with folks, and they say, yeah, I remember when he first met the late, great Reggie Shell here in Philadelphia, Black Panther owned, one of my earliest mentors here in Philadelphia. I remember talking to folks who said, yeah, I remember when he would come around, he was our lieutenant of information. That's Mumia Abu-Jamal. Lieutenant of information in the Black Panther Party as a teenager. And so when you hear the stories of the elders who tell you, yeah, Brother Gabe, he wanted to change Ben Franklin High School, right at Spring Garden Street, to Malcolm X High. Some of y'all remember that story, huh? And so there's a richness in the fabric of what Mumia has meant to this city. Whether you're from North Philly, Uptown, Southwest, wherever you're from, the reality is that that memory has always been a part of it, and it's that historical memory of movement that's going to take us forward towards his freedom. You know, there were some meetings of late with black clergy and other clergy members talking about support, and I had a late call with an elder friend of mine who said, Gabe, I want you to share this is on my heart for you. I'm sure my clergy friends who are in space today know this very, very well because it applies to us. Isaiah 61, I'm going to go there. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and release from darkness for the prisoners. Now, I'm nobody's reverend, I'm nobody's pastor, but when I hear the terminology of freedom for the captives, I'm thinking about the black and brown and poor who've been locked down in Philadelphia for too long. When I think about release from darkness, I'm thinking about those who have been marginalized for decades, if not centuries. When I think about those who need to be free as prisoners and those who have been incarcerated for too long, I'm thinking about those here in Philadelphia, mom and dads and caretakers and parents who need to come home and be in their home and live out their lives in grace from Germantown Avenue to Woodland Avenue and everywhere in between. The reality is, what are we going to do today to assure ourselves? Because, like my elder once told me, and I want to bring him in as I close, Brother Abdul Sabor, may he rest in paradise. He used to be in the 36 as well from Mumia Abu-Jamal. He used to always say, Brother Gabe, Mumia is not a person, he's a people. He used to say, Mumia is not a person, he's a people. He's a people that represents those who fight for justice, those who understand the value of resistance, those who are able to galvanize even against the greatest odds, whether you're in the confines of a cell or perhaps on a judge's bench. There's always a time to do what's right. And so not only are we calling on, but we're asking, we're demanding on Judge Lucretia Clemons here in the city of Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, sisterly affection, and family care, if you want to include that for my non-binary folk. If we're going to do this work, there's always a time to do what's right. And now is the time to do what's right. Free them all from Mumia.
Thank you, Gabe, and thanks for putting things in context. Justice Jackson had a phrase that maybe we really didn't want to give to him, but he said, text without context is pretext. And so much of what we hear about Mumia leaves the context out. So it's good to hear some of that Philadelphia context on Mumia. But what we're going to hear next is the context that has been missing from the courts for 40 years. Courts are supposed to be about justice. That's what we're all told. But when we look at Mumia's case, and all of the judges who have handled his case, and we're talking about dozens, it wasn't until 2018 that the word justice appeared in any judicial opinion related to Mumia. It was when a Philadelphia judge, Leon Tucker, looked at how a former district attorney of Philadelphia, a guy named Ron Castile, who went up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court with the help of the FOP, the main organization trying to, one, kill Mumia and then keep him incarcerated if they can't kill him. And Judge Tucker said that having Castile on that case was a fundamental injustice. And the courts of Pennsylvania said, well, Tucker, we don't know what you're looking at, but we don't see any problem here. And that's what the injustice is. So, Judge Griffen will break it down for us. Because see, they try to shroud law in mystery and say you need to go to law school. And law school is not enough. You need to get an LLM. You need to get a master's degree in law before you fully understand. What you're going to hear today, what you're going to hear from Judge Griffen, you don't need a law degree to understand this. And that application to lawyers and judges and people in that business. But this is common sense. What is so common in terms of the injustice makes no sense. And this is what you'll hear. Judge Wendell Griffen is pastor of the New Millennium Church in Little Rock, Arkansas, and is a recently retired Arkansas State Trial Court judge. He retired from the Arkansas Judiciary in December 31st, 2022, and continues to work as a public theologian and as CEO and owner of Griffen Strategic Consulting, a private firm devoted to advising individuals, institutions, and other actors concerning cultural competency, equity, and inclusion. So, a historic note, since we're still just 2 weeks after Black History Month. Little Rock, Arkansas, we know so much because of the desegregation of school fights. But Little Rock, Arkansas was the place where the first African American was elected a judge in 1873. Yes, their name was Star Gibbs, who just happens to be a Philadelphian. Take care.
Thank you, man. Free Mumia. I am glad to be here in Philadelphia, and I want to first of all give a shout out to Mumia Africa. All Jr., God bless you, brother. To Lynn Washington, who has been steady in the process of who has been the one, I call it the quarterback. And I'm glad to be on the phone with Mark and Mark, who needs nobody else to. Let me be very clear. As Lynn Washington said, you don't have to have a law degree to know when something is jacked up. And I know I'm in church. Or as I said, I'm home in church. And so I'm going to keep it nice and churchy, but I'm also keep it good, all right? Let me talk to you about basic fairness. Basic fairness. Look, somebody say basic fairness. Basic fairness. Now, the legal term for that, as we lawyers know, is called due process, okay? I mean, that's the two words, but due process means basic fairness. What everybody, anybody, is supposed to have happening whenever they're dealing with the government. Basic fairness requires that if any of us, is accused of a crime, the government has an obligation to produce and deliver to us all the evidence it has for our innocence. They can't just say, okay, we're going to cover up the stuff
that shows you're innocent and bring out the stuff that we want to put you away with. Basic fairness means that if the government is going to charge us, the government cannot hide stuff that clears us. You follow me? You don't have to go to law school. You don't have to have a JD, an LLM, you don't have to be a lawyer, a judge, a law professor. Just want to understand basic fairness. And that happens all the time. It's supposed to happen with anybody, and it's supposed to happen especially when they charge you with the worst thing they can charge you with. If you're going to be fair anytime, you ought to be fair all the time. But you especially ought to be fair anytime you're going to charge anybody with the worst thing they can charge you with and have them subjected to the worst sentence they can have. Because if anybody needs to have basic fairness, it's somebody who's at the most vulnerable. Well, when basic fairness doesn't happen, when the government does not produce the evidence of our innocence that it has, we have a word for that. It's called a sham. Now that's not a legal word. That's not a legal word. That's a street word. Now, if I was someplace else, I would use a different word. All right? But where I come from, we call that jacked up. Okay? We call it jacked up. When that happens, the trial process is not just, it is jacked up. It is a sham. It is a farce. It is a fraud. And convictions that happen on that kind of basis cannot stand because, quite frankly, nobody should be convicted of anything based upon a fraud. Can we agree with that? Yeah. Now, that's not just something that Wendell came up with out of the hypothesis. I say you don't have to go to law school to that, but it is in the law. It is in the law. There's a case, we lawyers know about it, it's called Brady, B-R-A-D-Y, versus Maryland. And the short answer is, this dude named Brady was charged with a murder that was allegedly committed by him and his partner. Okay? And he pled innocent. His partner copped a plea and pled guilty of committing the homicidal act, killing the person in connection with his death, a robbery. Okay? The cops didn't tell Brady. The prosecutor didn't tell Brady that his partner had copped a plea. Brady went to trial and was found guilty of the murder because he said, I didn't kill him, but I did drive the car. And under law, under felony murder, you can be convicted of the murder. Brady got sentenced to death. Murder one. Appeal. Lost appeal. Lost appeal to the state Supreme Court of Maryland. Went to the U.S. Supreme Court. 1963 Supreme Court said, wait a minute, whoa. The prosecution knew that his partner had copped to killing the guy, and they didn't tell him. You cannot let that conviction stand. 1963 now. Understand? I'm just giving you all the law. Basically unfair. A sham. Jacked up. Right? So you got to go back and try him over on the sentence because he agreed that he was on the deal, but his sentence doesn't change. That's Brady. That's 1963. That is how many years before 1982? 39 years before Mumia was tried. DAs in Philadelphia knew that any evidence that pointed toward Mumia's innocence had to be delivered to his defense team. In 1981 they knew it, in 1982 they knew it, in 1983 they knew it, 1984 they knew it. Go count the numbers. All the way to 2018 they knew it and they did not disclose it. When Larry Krasner became the new DA, going to the DA's office, he found 6 boxes. 6 boxes of information that pointed toward Mumia's innocence. Anybody who says I'm lying, I 10-time double dog dare you to prove it. 6 boxes. This is what this is about. This is what this is about. This is what Judge Lucretia Clemons has to deal with right now. This black woman judge who has, in this case, has to decide whether or not to follow a law that's been on the books since 1963, based on a law that's older than that, because Brady v. Maryland is based on the 14th Amendment due process clause, which dates back to 1868. Okay? Don't ask me how I got to law school. So this is not new for me. This has been the law for a minute. And so let's be real clear, folks. The law was clear for the DA in 1981. The law was clear for the DA in 2018. The law is clear for Judge Clemons now. Mumia's conviction and sentence must not stand. It cannot stand. Because a sham is no reason to convict anybody. And a sham that the prosecutors have covered up. You heard Brother Lynn talk about the prosecutors have an ethical code. They have to disclose this. So I'm trying to figure out how is it that a prosecutor had an ethical code, discloses this, is now fighting. One of the prosecutors that is fighting Mumia's motion to have his case turned over is now fighting in front of Judge Clemons. Right? Hello? So well, this is not just Philadelphia, okay? Let me be real clear. Racism is racism. I've been black a long time. I may have been born tonight, I wasn't born last night. Okay? And it's a long time. This is wrong. I'm going to sit down, but I want you to keep in mind. This brother should come home. And this judge needs to hear our community say, Judge, you got the law. You got the power. Do what's right. We got your back. You do what's right. Is that all right? Yeah. Is that all right? Yeah. Is that all right? Yeah. Now, back home, I would say, let the church say, Amen.
Thank you, Judge Griffen. It's important to just really let this sink in a little bit. What we're talking about here is fundamental fairness.
Yes.
Due process, something that's guaranteed in the Constitution, not just the U.S. Constitution, but the Pennsylvania Constitution. It's codified in court rulings, and it's in, they call it black letter laws in Pennsylvania Code, as well as the ethics codes. This is a report that Larry Krasner put out, a little background on it. He issued the material that people are appealing in court. Larry Krasner found it. It wasn't somebody that just went into a trunk of a car that had been abandoned for 36 years and found it. The DA himself found it. And this is a report that came out in June of 2021. And he was touting why they need to correct these injustices. And it mentioned that withheld exculpatory evidence was a matter in all of the cases they overturned. But listen to this. This is not Larry. This is Larry. Our oath as prosecutors is to seek justice unconditionally with no limit as to time. So if that's the case, Mr. Krasner, why are you in court fighting against this? And if the law means the law, Judge Clemons, why are you fighting this? But see, the problem in the Mumia case is that the law has not been the law for him. And that's why there's this thing called the Mumia exception. The law means the law except for Mumia. There have been people that have been released directly from death row in Pennsylvania when it's been found that there's been withheld evidence. And before we move into showing you the evidence that they claim is solid, and you'll see that it looks like toothpicks holding up a platform on a piece of sand, it's going to fall apart. There was a case in 1992, a guy named Jay Smith. Some of you may remember, Jay Smith was accused of killing a woman named Susan Reinhardt and disappearing her kids. Prosecutors in that case, the state police in that case, and the state attorney general's office in that case withheld evidence for 2 years. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court was so outraged, they released him directly from death row. Who helped him with his appeal? A jailhouse lawyer named Mumia Abu-Jamal. So here we have Jay Smith. Here we have Nicky Scarfo, alleged head of the Philadelphia crime syndicate. And other mobsters, they released directly from jail because of withheld evidence and or prosecutorial misconduct. But the evidence that's piled this high in the Mumia case, they say it doesn't matter. In 1959, when Mumia was 4 years old, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court issued a ruling in a case where a guy in Philadelphia pled guilty to a murder. And the prosecutor and the judge said, well, just because he pled guilty, we can do what we want. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said, no, you can't. They said, just because if evidence of guilt piles as high as Mount Everest, every defendant is entitled to all the fundamental rights of a fair trial. And that is not happening in the Mumia case. Right now, we're going to take a look at a video which you'll hear and see, not just hear, but see how flimsy the evidence is against Mumia. Confessions. Police, right? There's a couple of people that are in the business of confessions, right? Police and police, right? So when you hear a confession, that means something, right? So we have one police officer, only one of the two, who claimed that they heard Mumia confess. Hours, literally an hour after Mumia supposedly made this confession, that one police officer, Gary Wakeshaw, files an official report and said the Negro male made no comments. Talking about Mumia. Mumia said nothing. 2 months later, he remembers that he heard the confession. Well, so they asked him, Officer Wakeshaw, on December 9th, he said the Negro male made no comment. Now, February, whatever, you're saying that he did make a comment. Could you explain that? And Wakeshaw says, well, what he said, it disgusted me, and I didn't realize that it had any importance until today. I know, keep that down, we're in a church. Don't say what you really mean, but it is nonsense. And the courts have allowed that to happen. So we'll move on to now this video. A photographer who was there on the scene of the crime on December 9, 1981. This photographer got there before the police got there with their crime scene investigators. and you'll see police tampering with evidence. You'll see evidence that was supposedly there according to the court testimonies that wasn't there. So you'll see this. And believe your eyes. It ain't that lying eyes business. You gonna believe me or your lying eyes? No. Look and you will see.
In May 2006, when I was working on the German version of my book Race Against Death, I saw a photo of the crime scene which I had not previously seen. Fortunately, the photographer had an unusual name, Pedro P. Polakov III, which was at the bottom of the photo. Soon I was on the phone with him. He had been the only press photographer at the scene, arriving there 10 to 12 minutes after the shooting, and he had taken 31 photographs, 26 of which he still had, and which he sent my way. We then communicated via email until I was finally able to meet him in a Philadelphia suburb in August of 2006. In the meantime, he showed me a lot of details in his photographs that I hadn't even noticed as one who was not there. Two aspects stick out in particular. They concern the star witnesses of the prosecution, Robert Schobert and Cynthia White. In other words, the two witnesses which stand in the center of the suppression of exculpatory evidence we are discussing tonight, the famous Grady issue. The evidence shows that Schobert asked prosecutor Joseph McGill for money and that the prosecution charges pending against White were all miraculously dropped after judicial officers in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts had exchanged memoranda which stressed that she had been a witness in a very important case and that Joseph McGill had a keen interest in the proceeding. The core meaning of the Polakov photos is that Joseph McGill had very good reason to take good care of these witnesses, because these photos blow the whole prosecution theory of the events and of how Officer Faulkner was killed completely out of the water, and with it the testimony by Schobert and White on which this theory is based. Before I walk you through the Polakov photos, let's listen to how prosecutor Joseph McGill in the film Case for Reasonable Doubt describes the events that led to the death of police officer Faulkner and the murder charge against Mumia Abu-Jamal.
He runs over, takes out this charger onto the revolver and fires and shoots the officer in the back. The officer then manages to turn around a little bit because of the momentum of the bullet. Did not affect the vital organs at that time, and was able to get off a shot at that time, which hit Mr. Jamal in the chest area. He then, that is, Officer Faulkner, continued to fall down. And as he fell down straight on the pavement area, he was, for all intents and purposes, debilitated. The defendant, Mr. Jamal, at this point, having been stopped, went over and straddled the officer, took both hands and held the weapon that he pulled out previously and fired 4 times. One of these shots, that is the second shot or third shot, I don't know which, actually went through in between the eyes of the officer's head. That was the killing bullet.
You have heard Prosecutor Joseph McGill's version of the events. According to him, Billy Cook, Mumia's brother, was stopped by Officer Faulkner. They stood within what you see on the picture as the green square. Abu-Jamal saw the stop, ran across the parking lot, shoots Faulkner in the back. The officer falls down, and while falling, gets off a shot, wounds Abu-Jamal, who then stands over him and kills the officer execution style by firing several shots, only one of which hits but kills him. The question really then is, who are the witnesses for this? You see them in the three circles. One of the witnesses, that's the blue circle, stood with his car on the other side of 13th Street on Locust before a traffic light. And he basically confirmed what you just heard from McGill, but the problem with him was that he was unable to identify Abu-Jamal as the shooter, and so he was much less valuable to the prosecution than the other two witnesses. And the other two witnesses were Robert Jober, that's the yellow circle, who claimed to have stood right behind the police cruiser of Officer Faulkner, and Cynthia White, who claimed to have stood at the southeastern corner of 13th and Locust. Jober said he saw only the end of the events. He was a cab driver and claimed to have let out a fare when he heard shots, and then he looked up and saw what McGill just described. Cynthia White, in her turn, claimed to have seen the whole sequence of Jamal when across the parking lot, shoots Faulkner, gets shot. She did not see that, but she claims she saw the execution style, killing of Officer Faulkner. And this is where the photographs come in, to which we now directly jump. When Pedro arrived, 10 to 12 minutes after the shooting, he found something that was both unforgettable and, as he later said, the most unprofessional handling of a crime scene that he had ever seen.
There are some things that we never forget. I can even tell you the developer that I used, how long those negatives were developed. Detectives weren't even on the scene at that point. Crime units were on the scene. Mr. Joe, the only thing that prevented me from actually inadvertently walking up behind and going over the blood trail itself was the fact that they had a single police barrier to the one side, and the only other thing they had at the other side was a police officer standing there saying, "Don't walk." You understand that?
In our email communication, Pedro also alerted me to some things that I had not seen by myself. One of them was the mishandling of Jamal's and Officer Faulkner's guns by an officer by the name of James Forbes, who held the guns in his bare hands and who happened to be one of only two officers who claimed to have seen Abu-Jamal's gun next to him when they arrived at the scene. This mishandling of the guns, which he swore he did not do in court, severely undermines his credibility.
It didn't seem like they were doing much forensic work.
They weren't doing any forensic work. Come on, the one officer's walking around holding the police officer's gun and the alleged murder weapon in his hands with no gloves. No gloves. Didn't bag it. Nothing. I mean, the whole time I was there, he's walking around with the guns in his hand.
One pillar of the prosecution's theory of the case is that apart from Officer Faulkner, Billy Cook, who was not charged with the murder, and Abu-Jamal, there was no one else at the scene, so that only Abu-Jamal could have done it. With regard to that, Pedro alerted me to another interesting fact. namely that Officer Faulkner's police hat, which was later on found on the ground, was originally on the roof of the passenger side of Billy Cook's VW, strongly indicating the presence of a fourth person at the scene, who might then have run away, and who might actually have been the one who killed Officer Faulkner.
Abacav's photos also illustrate other discrepancies at the crime scene.
You'll notice right here on the top of the Volkswagen we have Officer Faulkner's hat. This is the shot that the newspaper picked up, and now notice that Officer Faulkner's hat is down on the ground.
The mishandling of the gun and the wandering hat are certainly interesting pieces of evidence, but what does all of this have to do with our witnesses, Jovert and White? Well, the best comes last. Let's take another quick walk through the crime scene with Pedro Polak. Let's take another quick walk through the crime scene with Pedro Polakov as he arrives at 4 o'clock in the morning on December 9th, 1981. First thing he sees.
If you believe this should be a private call, please hang up and follow facility instructions to register this number as a private number. To accept this free call, press 1. To refuse this free thank you for using Securus. You may start the conversation now.
Hey, Mumia.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Mumia, we are having quite the event. We have Judge Wendell Griffen with us here, your ardent supporter. I'd like you to say hello to him.
Hey, Brother Mumia, God bless you.
God bless you, Brother Judge. How are you, sir?
I'll be better when you get home.
We have Mark Lamont Hill on the stage, Lynn Washington, and Gabriel Bryant. We're ready.
Dear brothers, sisters, friends, and comrades, I welcome you all. We come together for freedom, for liberty, and justice. Several days ago, we heard news about cops in Louisville, Kentucky, assaulting, assailing, and calling racist names of black residents of the city. Not just for years, but for decades at the very least. It made me think of two things. First, cops were violating the human rights and constitutional rights of tens of thousands of people for decades at least, right? Question: where were the judges? These
who's kept this movement alive for 41 years is right here, front seat. We love you, Mumia. We won't stop until you're walking the streets of Philadelphia.
Words of wisdom from Mumia. We're going to move now to Dr. Mark Lamont Hill, scholar, activist, abolitionist, and journalist. In social justice, literally go from Philadelphia to Palestine. Since his days as a youth in Philadelphia, Dr. Hill has worked on campaigns to end the death penalty, abolish prisons, and release numerous political prisoners. He is the founder and director of the People's Education Center in Philadelphia, as well as the owner of Uncle Bobby's Coffee and Books. And together with Mumia Abu-Jamal, he co-authored The Classroom and the Cell, Conversations on Black Life in America. Dr. Hill.
I didn't know I was going to go after Mumia. I thought I was going to do it on the video. That was a lot easier. I'm so honored to be here, a little overwhelmed. It's good to be with family again in real life. And I think of some of the giants who we've lost since the last time we were all together. People like Russell Maroon Schultz. People like Wadia Jamal, who will be sitting right here with us right now. We've all lost so much. Mumia has lost so much. Over 40 years. You heard Mumia talk just now. And as Mumia spoke, he spoke about Louisville. Lynn talked about the thousands of pieces that Mumia has written. They're not about him. Mumia's written a whole stack of books. Ain't one of them about him. Mumia does this work for the people. He does this work so that we get free. And we reciprocate that love and that struggle by battling to make sure that Mumia Abu-Jamal makes it back home. And the state has done every single thing that it can do to stop it. Talk about Palestine, I wrote a book except for Palestine. We can write a book except for Mumia. First Amendment says you have a right to free speech and free association. Except for Mumia, whose words as a 16-year-old were used as evidence to try to convict and execute him. They said that judges have to be impartial, but Judge Sabo was an undersheriff and a former member of the FOP. Except for Mumia, they say that you're supposed to have a jury of peers, and yet jurors were excluded based on race. They say the jurors are supposed to be impartial, but two of them say that they didn't think they could be impartial because one of them was related to a cop. He said they were shot. They make all kinds of exceptions for Mumia. And then when other people are convicted or when other people are exonerated and they have precedent, I ain't go to law school, but I know that word, precedent, and they say that once there's a precedent, you have to follow the precedent. And they say that a white man who was part of an Aryan prison prison gang could not have his association used against him, and yet Mumia had his former association with the Black Panther Party for self-defense used against him. It's an exception that cannot hold. They said we got to use our brain. The law is informed by something called the reasonable man standard. Oliver Wendell Holmes didn't want to think about black folk though. What would a reasonable person believe under these circumstances? Would a reasonable person believe that a black man in 1981 who just shot somebody, who just shot a police officer, is sitting in a room of police officers and says, I shot the police officer, and didn't nobody hear it? And then they write down, the Negro didn't say a thing. It's unreasonable. But when it comes to Mumia, reason don't matter. You say, well, the police wouldn't lie to us. Right. Now, this is the Rizzo era. Some of y'all from Philly, most of y'all from Philly, y'all know the Rizzo era of Philadelphia. Wanton violence and cruelty, beating people to death. Rizzo said in public, one thing about Rizzo, he ain't lied to you, he told you exactly who he was. He said, even if you're wrong, I'm going back you to a room full of police officers. They rode through North Philly, they rode through South Philly, beat my father almost within an inch of his life. They didn't charge him. But he wasn't alone, they did it to everybody. The FBI investigated the Rizzo administration and said their behavior in the Philadelphia Police Department shocks the conscience. The FBI said that. And they ain't got no conscience. So, this ain't old stuff, 1995. 6 more officers planted court in Philadelphia, planting evidence. So while they're fighting for an appeal, defending the integrity of the police are getting caught planting evidence. That's why Brady is so important, not just to Mumia's case, but to the black community. The state doesn't have a right to withhold evidence. The whole point of Brady is to say, if you got something that can get somebody free, you got to give it up. You got to share it. That includes witnesses who might be on the payroll. That includes people who might be snitches. That includes police officers who have a record, a documented record of lying under oath. The police can't keep putting the lying police officer on the stand and not tell you that he's been convicted or caught lying. They have to tell it to you because it's exculpatory. It gets you out of prison, it gets you off. Because a reasonable person would say that absent this evidence, I wouldn't have made the same decision. But what they did in the Mumia case is they made sure y'all didn't see none of that. They didn't want you to hear about ballistic evidence. They didn't want to hear about guns that didn't match. They didn't want to hear about witnesses that didn't show up. They went on vacation at the time of the trial. Handwritten reports that ended up being typewritten even though they said it was handwritten. They didn't want you to hear none of that. But that's why we're here. Some of y'all from North Philly. Some of y'all from South Philly. Some of y'all from West Philly. I can tell you y'all all from the hood. And one thing we got in the hood is roaches. You know what roaches do? Whatever they want. When the lights is out. They eat your food. They go in your bag. They watch Netflix. They do whatever they got to do when the light is off. But when you put the light on, they run. They scatter. They become afraid. What this Philadelphia Police Department has done, what this prosecutor's office has done, has been in the dark. And what we do every single day, what Pam Africa has been doing, what Johanna is doing, what Mumia has been doing, what everybody in this room has been doing, is putting a light on this system so that they can continue to operate with impunity in the dark. See, the state ain't got no feelings. The state doesn't have feelings, it only has interests. The state didn't just get religion and decide to give up some evidence. Just like the state 6 boxes that just happens to corroborate the very things that we've been saying since day one. That a witness with 36 prior convictions, 38 arrests, forgive me, who had 3 pending at the time, and suddenly they all went away. And then she went away. A questionable witness who may not even been there, asking for his money after he gave testimony that was questionable. Handwritten notes talking about how we're going to exclude jurors from the trial. Black jurors. A city of 40% black, and the jury pool ain't 40% black. 120%. We got a box of evidence that shows every single thing we've been talking about. And they're saying we don't know what to do. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to turn the lights out. We're going to turn the lights up. We're going to make it so bright that they can't do the wrong thing. Lucretia Clemons, you ain't going to do the wrong thing this time. You are going to see this evidence. Y'all are going to tell the truth. And we're going to get the thing that we have been fighting for 42 years. And that is justice. And justice is not slow death row. Justice is not a life sentence. Justice is bring Mumia home. What's the call? What's the call? What's the call? To the light.
Fire him up, boy. We're going to take a look at a quick video of Mr. Larry Krasner. Mr. Progressive DA. These photos that you see, and Dr. Michael Shipman that put this together, he's been working on this case for decades, coming up with things, but in these photos, what Mark just talked about in terms of what was in the box. In the boxes was one guy named Robert Chobert, who was supposedly an eyewitness. And he claimed that he pulls up behind the officer's car and observes everything through the officer's car, through Mumia's brother's car. Now, he must be Superman, but we'll let him do that. He can see through 2 cars at night, the lights flashing. But one of the things that you see about the Mumia case, we talk about the Mumia exception in terms of court rulings and everything, but we'll see so many irregularities where police didn't do what they normally do. If you shoot a gun, they give you a little test to show they didn't do it with Mumia. And then they say, well, why didn't you do it? He said, well, we didn't think he would ask us. You had him chained to a hospital bed. And since you beat him to an inch of his life after he was shot, you didn't care about what he wanted or not, so you would have done it. So they either did it and it didn't prove anything, or they didn't do it, which is gross incompetence. They're lying. But with this cab, the police crime scene investigative directive number 2 says that if a vehicle is moved, then you have to put chalk marks to show where it was. No chalk marks. But in this box, there was a report from an officer named Smolensky. I know I'm murdering his name, but bear with me. I went to a ghetto school. This officer writes a report saying that the commander on the scene asked him to ride over to homicide with the cab driver. So here the police assigned a police officer to go to homicide with the cab driver. So if the cab was behind the officer's car, why was it moved in the first place before the people came? Why wasn't it marked in terms of the police directive, crime scene directive? Again, lies. The guy wasn't behind the car. When you look at some of these crime scene photos, and we sense these crime crime scene photos to a guy whose job is to magnify images from deep space. When NASA sends his stuff out to Jupiter and Saturn, this guy's job is to magnify it and see what's there. You know, spacemen and stuff like that. Well, he magnified the photos and found that Chobert's cab was on 13th Street, not on Locust Street. Hello? And the prosecutors know all of this. So now we're going to have Larry Krasner say that there's no problem there. Well, the jury would have convicted anyway. This is what Lucretia Clemons is saying. We'll forget about the evidence of jury tampering and keeping blacks off the jury. We'll forget about the thing with Cynthia White and how all of her cases were handled. And we'll forget about Robert Chobert and his handwritten note to the prosecutor weeks after the trial saying, "Where's my money?" Because there was enough other evidence. Well, the other evidence doesn't make any sense. This business about shooting into the sidewalk. Let's get into the video. I'm just trying to run some time here. But I did a shooting a test. I got a piece of sidewalk. I got a gun. I believe that. So, we will get the video on so you can see Mr. Krasner in his own language, and then we'll come back with Dr. John Fernandez.
As for Mumia Abu-Jamal, that is in about the 40th year of its litigation. We have some things going on very actively in that case. We take that case no more and no less seriously than every other case because of the notoriety about it. One of the things that I've certainly seen in our work around exoneration and conviction integrity is I've seen that often the unfamous people get a whole lot less attention than the famous people. But what I can say in that regard is it is pending. There are certain restrictions on what we should appropriately say at this time. But it does, it is a microcosm of the realities of what progressive prosecutors face now when they're trying to go back in time and do justice, or they're trying to do justice moving forward, or they're trying to comply with their obligations to give exculpatory information. In a culture they used to shred and used to hide and used to destroy, a culture that I experienced for almost 30 years as a criminal defense and civil rights attorney.
Our next speaker will be Dr. John Fernandez. She's a professor in New York City. And I'm trying to pull up the... Yes.
I'm an associate professor of history at Baruch College of the City University of New York, and I'm the writer and executive producer of Justice on Trial, the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal. I want to thank Sunny Singh for building the tent in this church from the bottom up. And it is an honor for me to be here with these panelists, and it's an honor for me to speak alongside of the judge. When Larry Krasner was running for office in 2017, journalists in Philadelphia called the DA's office the deep state of the country's infamous criminal justice system. The office responsible for disappearing 36,000 black men from Philadelphia streets. That's why it's called the deep state. The office responsible for making Philadelphia the draconian law and order capital of the country, the district with the highest rate of incarceration of black and brown people in the country. That's Philadelphia. Krasner promised to change this, and he put emphasis on the city's conviction integrity unit, which has exonerated 29 people falsely imprisoned through misconduct, lying, and tampering with evidence on the part of the police to obtain convictions, convicted falsely through the concealment of evidence of innocence on the part of the prosecutors, misidentification. What Larry Krasner said, he was trying to say a lot of nothing, but he did say that Mumia's case is a microcosm of what was wrong with the city. Mumia's case is truly a microcosm of these violations that I've just outlined, for which he released, Larry Krasner, 29 people. These violations were rampant in the Philadelphia of the 1970s and 1980s. And why were they rampant? Because this was the high point of rogue white supremacy within the DA's office and the police department in Philadelphia. This was the era of Frank Rizzo's reign. This was the era of the McMahon tapes, a reference to the ADA Jack McMahon, who trained prosecutors right here in Philadelphia on how to exclude black people from the jury. Mumia was falsely convicted during this dark period in the history of Philadelphia. We now have a letter, as has been said, from key witness Robert Chobert, in which he is demanding to receive money owed to him by the prosecutor. The prosecutor promised him money in exchange for his testimony. That's called a bribe. We know it signals a Brady violation because Robert Chobert was a kept witness. He was kept at a hotel, he was fed daily, and he was driven to work every night by the police and brought back to work, and it happened all over again until the end of the trial. We also have a cache of letters from the prosecutor, Joe McGill, to other court officers about another key witness, Cynthia White. These letters request that no decision be made about her outstanding charges before consulting with Joe McGill. We know from another series of documents found recently and filed just this February 22nd that not only was she cleared of charges that would have put her behind bars for more than 20 years for fingering Mumia, she was also allowed the freedom of practicing her trade as a sex worker unperturbed by police. If that's not a Brady violation, I don't know what is. The Brady violation that hasn't made it to any court hearing is the suppression of even clear evidence of innocence, of even clearer evidence of innocence. And that's the presence of a fourth person at the crime scene, a man by the name of Kenneth Freeman. We know that there was a fourth person at the crime scene for many reasons. Kenneth Freeman was the business partner of Billy Cook. Both he and Billy Cook were stopped by Officer Faulkner on December 9, 1981. Why? We don't know. They had just shut down the newsstand they co-owned in Center City. That's why this whole thing started. Billy Cook was driving his Volkswagen, and Kenneth Freeman was in the passenger seat that night. Officer Faulkner asked Billy Cook to get out of his car, and Officer Faulkner started beating up Billy Cook, Mumia's brother, with his walkie-talkie. Mumia happened to be dropping a passenger off nearby, and he looked and saw that his own brother was being beaten by a cop. He approached the scene of the crime and was immediately shot by Officer Faulkner. It was at that point that Kenneth Freeman got out of the passenger seat and shot Officer Faulkner. That's what happened on the night of December 9th, 1981. Officer Faulkner was shot execution style, likely from a distance, because it was a clean shot right underneath the eye. The only person at the crime scene with the training to kill anyone in this manner was Kenneth Freeman, a decorated Vietnam veteran. A driver's license application found in Officer Faulkner's shirt pocket led the police straight to Kenneth Freeman, who they picked up the next morning, but the police let him go. We also know that Kenneth Freeman was at the crime scene because his presence was acknowledged by Prosecutor Joe McGill in the trial of Billy Cook, who was also being tried concurrently with Mumia in a separate trial about the same crime scene. But he was tried for assault of a police officer. Billy Cook was tried for assault of a police officer. Mumia was tried for killing the police officer. The presence of Kenneth Freeman at the crime scene was acknowledged at Billy Cook's trial by Prosecutor Joe McGill, but it was concealed in Mumia's trial. And the question is, why? We also know that the fourth person at the crime scene was there because Officer Faulkner's hat was originally seen on top of Billy Cook's car, right above the passenger seat. The Pedro Polikoff photos show that, but Officer Faulkner's hat ended up on the ground, dramatically placed next to a trail of Officer Faulkner's blood because the cops cooked up the crime scene. They moved things around to paint a different picture of what happened that night. Why was the district attorney's office not interested in the Polikoff photographs? Polikoff sent the photographs to the DA's office. Why did the prosecutor, Joe McGill, conceal the presence of Kenneth Freeman at the crime scene? All of these are Brady violations that are taken very seriously by prosecutors committed to reestablishing trust between the DA's office and the black communities it disproportionately locks up. Brady is sacrosanct. Brady is holy because the kind of rank corruption we see practiced by prosecutors like Joe McGill in the case of Mumia, the concealment of evidence of innocence from the defense makes a mockery of the office of the DA. It also leads to sham trials, as the judge explained earlier. When he was elected, Larry Krasner understood that he had to clean up his office if he was going to be taken seriously by the black people who elected him. He had to excommunicate, throw out old guard prosecutors who were reared in this culture by the devil of racism and white supremacy in the DA's office. But he kept a few old guard prosecutors. Tragically, he assigned the same old guard prosecutors who framed Mumia back in 1982 to litigate the claims before Judge Lucretia Clemons today. It's a case, literally, of asking the goat to watch the lettuce. In the last 6 months, many of us sat through the hearings in Judge Lucretia Clemons' court, and we watched these prosecutors lie arrogantly about the facts of the case. Who are these prosecutors in the DA's office who are lying about what actually happened in Mumia's case? Cole Stevens and Tracy Kavanaugh. We need to expose them. They kept repeating the same thing over and over and over again, that this is Abu-Jamal's upteenth appeal and that we've litigated all of this. But that's a lie. This is the first time in the history of this case that we have hard, new evidence of innocence, never before seen by any courtroom because it had been concealed by the prosecutor's office for almost 4 decades. Brady versus Maryland has not been litigated previously in this case, and that is why we are talking about Brady today. I'm going to end. On Victory Night in 2018, Krasner said this, quote, "Our vision is of a criminal justice system that makes things better, that is just, that is based on preventing crime, and is based on building up society rather than tearing it apart." This is what we want in Mumia's case, and in those of so many innocent others wrongfully convicted or overcharged in the city of Philadelphia. Justice for Daniel Faulkner means releasing Mumia now and formally identifying the person who killed him. Reckoning with the long history of racism in Philadelphia means granting Mumia the Brady claim, releasing him from prison for the concealment of exculpatory evidence by prosecutors, but also for having held him on death row unconstitutionally for 28 and a half years. Free Mumia.
Justice to this matter. Dr. Fernandez put together an incredible film back in 2010, Justice on Trial. And here we are in 2023, still awaiting justice from a trial court in Philadelphia. I want to bring Judge Griffen back up to tie up a few things, and then we'll move on to the latter part of our program. Judge Griffen.
5 minutes down. I'm going to go down to 5 minutes list. First of all,
recording in progress.
Okay, got it. Basic fairness. Basic fairness. If the prosecution has all the stuff that you saw against somebody you knew and was not letting that information be shown to that person's lawyer, would it be fair? If the prosecution didn't let that information be shared with the person's lawyer, would the person get a fair trial? If the person was convicted based on not having that information, would the person's conviction be just? That is what you know, and you didn't have to go to law school. Judge Clemons has gone to law school. Judge Clemons has taken the oath to uphold the law. Larry Krasner and every police officer and every elected official has to swear the same oath. There is an oath that every person who works in the government has to take. They swear an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And that Constitution has the 14th Amendment that requires due process of law, basic fairness. That is something that Judge Clemons has to do. And so we have to say, basic fairness, Judge. Basic fairness. Bring Mumia home. Basic fairness. Turn this thing over. Basic fairness. Mumia deserves to have a basic fairness. This is not special treatment. This is not preferential treatment. This is basic fairness. This is bottom line fairness. Let me ask you to do one other thing, please. Please do not allow people to let you think that somehow Mumia gets treated right if we stop talking. He doesn't get treated right. Please do not stop talking about this. Please ask people, why aren't you talking about this? This is in our country. This is in your city. This is in your state. If anybody ought to talk about any case, it ought to be Mumia's case, right? Last thing. I'm a preacher, I'm a judge. Jesus was convicted wrongly. All right? And Pontius Pilate washed his hands, knowing that Jesus was innocent, and sent Jesus to Calvary. We're coming towards Easter time. Judge Clemons is a person of faith. If she won't let Mumia go, then she's doing to Mumia right now. I was a judge for 24 years, okay? On appeals and on trials. I did murder trials. I know I've had relatives murdered. I know how it feels to have your loved one murdered. But we never let the friends of the murdered people decide what justice is. We don't let the relatives of the murdered people decide what justice is. I got feelings for Maureen Faulkner, okay, because I have relatives who were murdered. But you don't let me go and decide what justice is for the folks who are accused of murdering my kinfolk. Please, do not let folks from the police department or from Officer Faulkner's family say what justice is. Officer Faulkner's family deserves to have the real killer found. They deserve to have the real killer found, not to have the wrong person die by incarceration. Would you please say that? May I sit down? Please, ma'am, please, sir. I got love for you, but let's bring Mumia home.
Okay, moving right along, we're moving to a video statement by a person that many of you will recognize, Colin Kaepernick. And while this is going on, some people will be moving around for, if you can, provide little assistance to this movement. The name of Judge Clemons has been mentioned, and she's the judge that's currently handling Mumia's appeal. Pennsylvania has a thing called the Code of Judicial Conduct. You know, Martin Luther King once said, you know, America, just be what you say you are on paper. And if America was what it was said to be on paper, we wouldn't be here talking about this. Because Mumia would have gotten some justice a long time ago. But this Code of Judicial Conduct said judges should uphold the dignity of judicial office at all times, avoiding both impropriety and the appearance of impropriety in their professional and personal lives. You've heard from Judge Griffen, you've heard from Dr. Fernandez. The matter that's pending before the judge right now is real simple. 36 years of evidence that was held wrong under any circumstance at all. Not only should it at least be a new evidentiary hearing or a new trial, the reality is that this injustice is so large that it demands the immediate and unconditional release of Mumia Abu-Jamal.
When I was invited to speak on behalf of Mumia, one of the first things that came to mind was how long he's been in prison. How many years of his life have been stolen away from him, his community, and his loved ones. Since 1981, Mumia has maintained his innocence. His story has not changed. Mumia was shot, brutalized, arrested, and chained to a hospital bed. The first police officer assigned to him wrote in a report that the Negro male made no comment, as cited in Philly Mag. Yet 64 days into the investigation, another officer testified that Mumia had confessed to the killing. Mumia's story has not changed. But we're talking about the same Philadelphia Police Department whose behavior shocks the conscience, according to a 1979 DOJ report. Behaviors like shooting nonviolent suspects, abusing handcuffed prisoners, and tampering with evidence. It should therefore come as no surprise that according to Dr. Johanna Fernandez, over 1/3 of the 35 officers involved in Mumia's case were subsequently convicted of rank corruption, extortion, and tampering with evidence to obtain convictions in unrelated cases. This is the same Philadelphia Police Department where officers ran racial profiling sweeps like Operation Cold Turkey in March 1985, targeting black and brown folks, and bombed the Move House in May of that year, killing 11 people, including 5 children, and destroying 61 homes. The same Philadelphia Police Department whose officers 8 days before the 2020 presidential election shot Walter Wallace Jr. dead in the streets in front of his crying mother. The Philadelphia Fraternal Order of Police has unrelentingly campaigned for Mumia's execution. During their August 1999 national meeting, a spokesperson for the organization stated that they will not rest until Abu-Jamal burns in hell. The former Philadelphia president of the Fraternal Order of Police, Richard Costello, went as far as to say that if you disagree with their views of Mumia, you can join him in the electric chair, and that they will make it an electric couch. Found in December 2018 in an inaccessible storage room of the DA's office, 6 boxes of documents from Mumia's case reveal previously undisclosed and highly significant evidence showing that Mumia's trial was tainted by a failure to disclose material evidence in violation of the United States and Pennsylvania constitutions. He is a grandfather. He is an elder with ailments. He is a human being that deserves to be free. Free Mumia.
Our next speaker is one who has also been a part of the effort to shine.
Can you hear me? I hope you can.
I think we can now.
Can my brothers and sisters hear my voice? Lifting my voice. For my dear brother Mumia. I have a deep love for Mumia Abu-Jamal. A profound respect. I want Jamal Jr. to know you come from a family of intellectual nobility. That's right. And moral royalty. Never forget it. Damn. Oh, Lord have mercy. Oh, I wish I could give you a hug all of these years and decades in struggle together. Your vision, your spirit, your flame, your zest, your zeal. Ramona too. Lynn, Gabe, Mark, we can go cross over. But we're here for our brother who would want us to keep the focus on what he has dedicated and devoted his life to, which is trying to overcome the suffering of a hated people, a terrorized people, a traumatized people, a people of sorrow. And what do we get in the example of Mumia Abu-Jamal? We get a major wave in the ocean of our movement. We see an example of why we remain to this day, despite the circumstances, of great people, because in the face of all of this chronic hatred, here comes another love warrior, Mumia Abu-Jamal. Oh, when I was with him with the great James Cone and my dear mother Chris Hedges, those hours spent in the prison, what did we do? We talked about Curtis Mayfield, we talked about Nellie Hathaway, we talked about Nina Simone, we talked about Aretha Franklin, we talked about the freedom fighters, Martin King, Malcolm, not just because they're icons. No, Mumia Abu-Jamal is part of that
is always a crime. And before deeply in love with a hated people, you're going to be criminalized, but we will not allow them to have the last word. You know, you try to reduce black freedom to a pipe dream, and black history to a curse, black folk to a joke, but we are here to say we free Mumia, bring him back home in the name of a long struggle, of a great people that said black folk can be more than a joke. Black history ain't no curse. And black love, it may be a crime to white supremacists, but we are willing to live, and yes, we are willing to die. Let it be very clear that our dear brother Mumia Abu-Jamal, though incarcerated, is freer than most black folk. Because his soul is intact, because he's got Sankofa, he's connected to the best of the past. The courage of a Harriet Tubman is shot through him. The stern truth shot through him. I.W. Wells shot through him. A. Philip Randolph shot through him. Marcus Garvey shot through him. Not saying that Mumia is God or deity. No, not at all. It's never been a part of our movement. All of us are cracked vessels. But when it comes to the cloud of witnesses, of those who will tell the truth, and that's all we ask for the judge to do. Sister Clemons, allowing evidence to be brought into the open, as Brother Mark said. That's all we're asking. Truth, and the condition of the truth is to allow suffering to speak. The condition of truth is always to allow the voices of the least of these to be heard. Mumia Abu-Jamal, intellectual giant, spiritual tyrant that he is, he's an extension of the best of us. And we ought to be an extension of the best of him. He's innocent to be dead. He stands accused of loving black people. He stands accused of fighting for justice for oppressed people. He stands accused of holding up a bloodstained banner. We all ought to be accused in that way. Bring him home. Please acknowledge the evidence and then allow us to have in our midst one of the greats, one of the grand figures produced by our people and by our movement, love warrior, freedom fighter, wounded healer, and joy spreader, Mumia Abu-Jamal.
helped bring all of this together, and that's Julie Wright. Yeah. The daughter of Richard Wright, along with Michael and Annette Schiffman and Mark Taylor. These were the organizers of this event in Washington.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for caring. Not only those who are here, but those who are listening on live stream. The fight for justice is not a sprint race. It's actually a marathon, and it's a marathon relay. And after we all run our long 26.5 mile leg, we got to hand that baton off. And this fight will continue. So once again, thanks. Some of the evidence that Michael Schiffman has put on, there's copies of it in the back. There's a real good primer on what this case is all about. And again, you've heard from some experts here, and believe what you see. And what you've seen for the last 4 decades is an absolute outrage. And it needs to end and there's a woman who sits in the criminal justice center. Leave that phrase alone for a minute. But there's a judge who is sitting in Philadelphia's criminal justice center that has the power and the duty to right a wrong. And in doing so, she will only be following the law. Right. So the question is, Judge Clemons, are you going to follow the law? The question is, Larry Krasner, are you going to follow the law? The question is, FOP, are you going to follow the law? We know the answer to that. Because we've seen it for decades. Actually, we've seen it for centuries. So listen, thank you very much. Thanks to all the people who worked very, very hard. And as that phrase, I hold your continuity. The struggle continues. And this is a phrase that is out in a neon sign out in front of the Supreme Court's building in South Africa, in Johannesburg. We'll now have some Q&A. Just a few questions. There was some questions. All right, this one.
Raise your hand up. I'll run around real quick in a second. And again, as my brother Mark always says, a question ends in a question mark. All right?
Yes, good afternoon, panel. Good afternoon. My question is, even in a lie about the position of the cars, why wasn't that looked at as exculpatory evidence? And from what I've seen the test that you did, Dr. Washington, Mr. Washington, about the thing. But why his gun wasn't even fired? Why was the trial, and they were saying that Mumia defended himself in the trial. Besides that, why wasn't he not exonerated for the evidence and with Wendell? Why? And the media, some of the media is not speaking of, why wasn't he not exonerated because of that one position in the car and everything?
If you can hit this quick,
You get it from a judge.
The judge who handled that case is named Arthur Sabo. He handled more death penalty cases than anybody else in Philadelphia history. A court stenographer heard Judge Sabo say this before the trial. I am going to help them fry that in, and he finished the other word. That's the answer to the question. That's called judicial bias.
I'm going to take one more on this side, then we're going to go. So
the information that we know now, the jury never heard. And they didn't hear it in large part because of the judge excluding it. So the trial process was corrupted from the beginning.
My simple question is, can the judge just outright release Mumia?
Yes. Under the Brady standard, the judge has the power to declare that his conviction and sentence must be overturned. She has that power. Prosecution will appeal it. But she has that power. And that is the power that only she has. There's nobody else on the planet who has that power right now.
Okay, as they say, all good things come to an end at some point, so we have to conclude today. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you again for your support.
Yeah.